His name's Phil.
And his name is Tim.
And this is Tim and Phill Talk About Games.
A podcast where Tim and myself get together and talk about games we've recently played and discuss topics in the world of gaming.
This week on our inaugural video podcast, we're asking ourselves what it takes to make a meaningful death.
We'll be looking at how death as a mechanic started, how it has evolved, and what lies ahead for the future of death in gaming. Insert intro music. Alright, so we are Tim and Phill. We are from the podcast Tim and Phill Talk About Gaming. If you're wondering why the title of this video is 018, that's because the first 17 of our episodes were recorded as a podcast, not as a video. So this is something new for us. We've kind of got a little bit of an overlay going. You're going to be able to see we've pre-recorded hundreds and hundreds of video game deaths, hopefully. Probably dozens, maybe dozens, not hundreds.
Probably close to dozens.
Probably close to dozens, because we don't have that many games. Well, actually we do. We really do.
We really, really do. It's absolutely embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about death in gaming, because it is something that we've kind of been wanting to talk about for a while, because it's a really interesting topic. Basically, why exactly is it that that death as a mechanic is so pervasive in all games that we play? So
why is it?
Yeah, why is death? Yeah, because if you're playing a mobile game, hardcore PC gamer, Xbox, whatever, any kind of gaming, quite often the what's the word? Words.
The main mechanic.
Yes,
the main mechanic of the system, it revolves around, more often than not, the concept of dying when you are failing.
Yeah, the condition of failure is death, and that's a really, really interesting thing. So obviously we want to talk a little bit about the history of it, like why did that come about? We want to talk about the different types of death that can be experienced and what has happened in recent years to make death not really something that actually happens that often. So yeah, that's kind of what we want to do. Just a forenote before we get too far in the podcast, there are going to be planes going over, and you are going to hear them because Tim and I
live right underneath an airport.
Exactly. We're going to have a little counter hopefully up that you can join in counting the number of planes. Yeah, that go over Tim's head. So that's going to be fun. Anyway, so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was where the origin of death as a mechanic came from, and I believe Tim has some insight into this. So where exactly did it start, Timothy?
It mostly starts in the arcades.
Yeah. For those listeners and viewers that have no idea what an arcade is, what's an arcade?
An arcade is a place where you would go physically. You would take your flesh sack in meat space, and you would somehow make it ambulatory and force it to go down to the nearest place where they would have video game machines. And these video game machines were this one machine. All it played was one game, because that's all it knew how to do. It only knew how to play that one game. So I mean, most people, certainly people I think would be listening to the podcast, know what an arcade machine looks like. I mean, everyone's seen it in older movies, and it's a bit of an icon.
It's in the latest Tron movie. There you go.
Yeah, it's in the latest Tron movie. That's what the whole thing Tron was kind of based on.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, the fact that I'm pretty sure for a long while iOS used an arcade machine as the game icon on the OS. So, I mean, the iconography of it is very, very strong. It's very pervasive.
Right.
So, you would have these machines and you would go down and you would play them. But what you would have is a system where you were putting money into the machines. So if you were American, these were quarters, being 1/4 of a dollar.
Yeah, that's a lot cheaper than us.
20 and 50-cent coins, and you would rarely get an arcade game for less than $1 on our machines.
That's true.
I don't know if we got more lives out of that or what the case was. Probably not.
I don't think so.
Probably just paid a lot more.
Yeah.
Some of them were 80 cents. I remember putting in 420s.
Yeah, I remember that. A
lot of machines.
Yeah, they had the weird.
A life out of that.
They had the weird 4 slots, and you have to put the 20 cents in and then
slide it across.
Yeah, and it felt so good, just smashing.
Oh, that chuk noise! Yeah, it was amazing.
It was good.
But anyway, the point was that the idea of the arcade machine was to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, that is what these things are for.
Yeah, and the economics
to make
of
money, yeah, you need people to come back, right?
Well, and you need people to stop playing as well. That's the thing.
Yeah. So what you need is a system that artificially halts someone's progress until they don't have any more little silver coins to put in the hungry machine.
Yeah. So
the easiest way of doing this was, whatever character you had, whether it was, right the way back from the 1980s Asteroid through to, your Contras and your Metal Slug and
Time Crisis.
Metal Gear,
Time Crisis.
all the classic arcade machines. The easiest way to stop your progress was just to have you die. Essentially, you get shot, your ship blows up, whatever the case is that your character dies, and then you start again, or you continue where you left off, depending on the game and the mechanic involved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, death is the reason they would use death. For it's easy. It's really easy to do,
and everyone's familiar with it.
Everyone's familiar with it. Not hopefully, but
by now.
Hopefully you're familiar with the concept.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not familiar with the death itself.
Yeah, hopefully not.
But
we don't wish our readers and viewers and listeners to die.
Or to have relatives die, or goldfish, or whatever the case might be there.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that it's a very cheap emotional hook. Like, it gets you back to playing the game. Oh, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Dying sucks. I don't want to die. I want to keep going. I want to keep playing. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a really easy way to get you coming back and putting the coins back in the machine and keep going and going and going and going and going.
Yeah.
So that's where it sort of starts off.
Yeah.
But it also, not just the concept of, it forcing you to keep going. It also is the concept of breaking the game down into small, discrete packages that you have to keep paying for.
Yeah.
That's more the point that we're trying to get across. The fact that the death mechanic, the regular dying, is something that is kind of an aberration to games pre-arcade machines. If you fail in something, it's usually a long-term failure, not lots of short-term failures to get to an ultimate goal.
Yeah. And I guess it's combined with the idea of the high score, and it's combined with the idea that games have to be challenging and have to be something that a player can beat. Now, nowadays, obviously, we have the luxury of, a lot of games nowadays are kind of straying away from that. So you have got games that are much more like interactive storytelling, but a lot of those games still have this weird death condition whereby maybe you don't click a button fast enough, or you don't, react to a quick time event fast enough, and you can still fail that, and you can still experience that mechanic again of death. And so we kind of wanted to, I guess, look at what different games have done in order to kind of circumvent this, and what kind of attitude games take towards the mechanism of death, and the mechanism of how the player is going to be, or how do you work around the idea that you still want to challenge the player, but you don't necessarily want to punish them through the mechanic of death. Like, what other options are there? I guess the first thing is we should probably discuss the different types of death. So the different types of death that we've experienced. It sounds weird to say, but the different types of death that we've experienced in games. That's plane one, by the way. Just all right, if you're keeping count at home, that's plane one from Tim's end. We wanted to break it up into two different types of death, because if you played any number of games, you'll probably be familiar with games that, such as the old arcade games. They're the kind of games that rely on mechanical death. Like, it's a game mechanic whereby your player dies and you have to restart, and that's how they make it more challenging, is that, there's more enemies on screen, therefore you're more likely to die, therefore you're more likely to run out of lives and have to pay to keep going. So mechanical death, generally speaking, only has a few different types of, or what we call subtypes. So this is all stuff that we've kind of, it's not necessarily researched, we've kind of got a feel for it because we've played so many different games. So we classified them.
It's researched from like a first principles thing. Yeah. We physically have researched it by having experienced it so very much.
Exactly, we're field agents essentially. So we kind of went with permadeath. So the first type of mechanical death is permadeath. That's basically your, if you played any kind of roguelike, if you played any kind of one-hit die kind of game, as soon as you fail, you're back to the beginning. So you're talking about your super hexagons, any kind of roguelike game whereby if you die,
we shouldn't have started with permadeath, should we?
No,
I mean, it's kind of the aberration of the three that
that's true.
we're going to talk about.
But anyway, so moving on. So the other two were limited lives, which is your very, very traditional, like if you played Mario, if you played Pac-Man, if you played literally any game for about the last 20 years, you will have encountered limited lives. Limited continues, limited some way. And then there's instant respawn, which is one that we kind of put in there because a lot of games nowadays are designed in such a way where if you die, you are kind of put back a little bit, but you're not necessarily punished to the full extent of having to restart the game. So
even the level. You just come back.
Yeah, exactly. So you're talking about games like, I mean, it even extends to games such as Halo and other first-person shooters whereby when you die, you may go back to the last checkpoint. Like there's the checkpoint system whereby it's not, you don't have to start from, literally the first scene of the game, but you do lose, some of your time. Like the incentive is to get through the game without losing out those, 10, 15 minutes of lost gameplay. And also it includes games such as Super Meat Boy, whereby if you die, you are literally instantaneously respawned and you can just go back to like,
so instantaneous that you can still see the blood and viscera of your previous life falling from the level.
Exactly. And to me, that's a really, really good design. And we've spoken about that on the podcast in prior.
Well, they all have their pros and cons. I mean, we're not saying that death is a bad mechanic.
No.
I mean, it can be lazy at times.
It can be lazy.
It's not inherently bad.
No.
And there are certainly times where it's good and times where it's not so good.
I mean, the thing is, it is like we're not bagging on game designers. We want to make that absolutely abundantly clear from the start.
Yeah.
Because trying to think of a way that especially in these kind of narratives where you're playing as a person, like say in Halo or say in any of those first-person shooter games, you're playing as someone who's trying to save the world. If you how could you possibly have any kind of other way of challenging the player? Like, how could you have any other failure mechanism? Like, it works in the narrative sense of the game. Like, you've died in the war, therefore that's the only thing that's going to stop you, because otherwise,
when your prime mechanic is literally guns, I mean, death is the natural sort of, that's where you go.
It's very difficult to imagine any kind of other thing. So this is absolutely not, we just wanted to discuss the different types of death and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, now that we've covered our asses.
The reason I would say that permadeath is kind of the odd one out of the two, because the limited lives, I mean, like you said, is probably the most prevalent that we see, especially in early games.
Yeah.
And insta-respawn is, I say now, is a lot more common than it used to be, and is easily now more common than the limited life system as well.
I guess we can call that insta-respawn / checkpointing,
because there's different ways you can implement it. There's the checkpointing system, like in, for example, Halo, where you just, so in Halo, the save reloads to the previous checkpoint, so it's like we pretend that little bit of time didn't happen. And
we don't have to reach all the way back to Halo, though. Like, it's in Bioshock, it's in just about anything that's recent, pretty much.
Well, see, because it's kind of differently implemented in Bioshock.
Yeah, okay.
So with the Halo implementation, I would say, like, the canon of the story is the story that doesn't include the death, right? So you've gone through, and it's each of the successful bits that you've played, you tie them together, and that gets you one cohesive canon.
It's as if you've never died.
Right, but in Bioshock, you have, like, for example, the Vita Chamber.
Which is built into the story.
Literally regenerate at that Vita Chamber. So the things that you've done before the checkpoint sort of thing, they still happen. Nothing gets rewound. The clock stays the same. It keeps ticking forwards.
Yeah.
But you've been regenerated. So that's kind of different to the checkpointing system.
Yeah, that's true.
And also I would say that, for example, Borderlands is another example where you are sort of sucked away and you get respawned in a new body. In fact, it's exactly the same mechanic, isn't it?
Yeah,
Exactly. Quite literally are just being rebuilt.
Yeah. So they're kind of the mechanical deaths. And then you have the opposite, which is the narrative death. So if you've played any kind of a large-scale fantasy game or large-scale, story-driven game, like we're talking about, it's almost exclusively story-driven games. Whereby you have deaths that occur that are in conjunction with the story. So, you know, you see it in all kinds of mediums. You see it in movies, you see it in TV shows, you see it in just about anything. So it's not a surprise that it also happens in games, whereby you have characters or, you know, people that aren't necessarily the player that die. It can be the player that dies and then you continue as a different player character, I should say. But majority of the time, I would say it's usually...
Oh, like 90% of the time, it's usually
either a side
companion.
Character, like not the hero, it's the side character. Sorry, not the protagonist, I should say. It's a side character or it's an NPC that you have no control over. So do you want to go through them, Tim?
Yeah, well, so the ones that we sort of came up with were the concepts of a linear death, where you don't have any control over this. It just has to happen for the story to continue.
Yeah.
So just like in a book, you know, you can't skip a page where your favorite character dies.
Yeah.
You might not have read the death, but they're still going to be dead on the next page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Small plane. And then you've got... Yeah, you'll have to listen to them again in edit. So then you've got the games that use death as a choice mechanism.
Yeah.
And these can be insidious. Sometimes they're really well done. Sometimes they're terribly done.
Yeah. Yeah.
But either way, the root mechanism here is the fact that the game requires you to make a choice that will result in someone dying.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is something like, for example, in Mass Effect, where you have quite literally two characters and you have to choose one of them. So only one of them can survive. You only have time to save one of them.
Yeah.
Or the same thing presented in The Walking Dead by Telltale.
Yeah.
So you've got literally, you go left or right depending on which person you want to choose. I mean, that's an absolutely stark binary option where you have to choose one of them and the other dies.
Yeah.
So it still progresses the story. Once again, you can't stop it from happening, but
you have some limited
influence.
control, and it's down to you.
Yeah. And then the third one we thought of was kind of a... we're calling it accidental death.
Yeah, it's not necessarily accidental, but...
No, but it's something you could maybe have avoided.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's where your player is given agency, but the choices that you make aren't necessarily save this person or save that person. It's just that the choices that you make
do this thing.
Snowball into leading to this thing. And the most obvious game that we came up for that is the Banner Saga, where you never choose, or I should say hardly ever choose between characters. You're almost always choosing options to survive, and then, you know, those options lead to someone possibly passing away. So it's kind of I guess that's like a sub-genre, like sub type.
Yeah.
Because it's quite specific to that game, although I'm sure there have been other games.
Well, again, Mass Effect does it.
Yeah.
Especially Mass Effect 2.
They're kind of hidden choices.
Yeah, so, I mean, and some of them aren't even that well hidden, really. But the point is that you do something, and if you do it wrong, or if you choose the wrong thing, then somewhere a little bit further down the track, you know, a character might die as a result of it. That happens a lot in Mass Effect 2.
Yeah.
Which you would know all about, Phil.
Because I definitely have played it. Yeah, I haven't played it. It came out during our research for this that I haven't actually played any of the Mass Effect series, and Tim just about exploded. Yeah.
Horrifying.
And then there was something else you said. You wanted me to... You were like, at least you played blah. And I was like,
Yeah, no, I haven't done that either. Whoops.
Oh, no, that's right. It was... I hadn't finished... I'm not sure if I finished Bioshock. Because I can't remember. I'm fairly sure I haven't. Which is really bad. But hey, there you go. I got limited time. I'm a busy man.
Yeah.
So I guess I wanted to as far as my wanting to discuss these topics is like, how do you think that we are moving away from stuff like limited lives? Because I mean, I've noticed even just within some series, like I've noticed Super Mario obviously started off, you had 3 to 5 lives. I can't even remember. You know, the NES versions. You start the game, and it's kind of hard to come across those 1-up mushrooms. Like it's not a trivial thing.
No, they don't exactly grow on trees.
No, they don't. Well, they don't anyway. But
kind of grow in the ground.
Well, unless they're symbiotic with some kind of jungle tree. Anyway, you kind of had this very limited resource of lives, and that was probably made because the game was made around about the same time as arcades were still in effect, and it probably helped to sort out things like brothers making sure that they took turns, because there was literally the game over screen. And I thank them for that, because otherwise I never would have gotten the look in, because my brother was bigger than me. But nowadays, you play Super Mario Galaxy or Super Mario Galaxy 2, those things are freaking everywhere, and you can't actually really run out of lives. Like, I don't think I played through Super Mario Galaxy. I died a bunch, not a huge amount, because it's kind of a kid's game, it's kind of easy, but like, I was never in any... I think I had 99 mushrooms for like basically the entire game. Like, it was, or whatever the limit is. Like, it never even crossed my mind that I might actually run out of those. So it seems like even the people that started the tradition, even the companies and the game genres and the game developers that kind of were at the beginning of this, are kind of moving away from it and kind of making the mechanics basically invisible.
Well, I think it's because, I mean, a lot of games. So again, it's kind of hard to detract or to separate the game design from the published design. Yeah, if that sort of makes sense. Right. So
explain.
Once this gigantic plane has finished flying.
Oh.
So what you've got is, the idea of the game life, as we were talking about, being a mechanic of making you have to, restart and put more money into the system.
Well, nowadays we have the system
we have the system. We already own it.
Yeah.
So nowadays it's the opposite. Game developers and certainly game publishers don't want you to ever stop playing the game.
That's true. Yeah.
Because as soon as you stop, you are, you're spending your time and your attention elsewhere, and then you might not buy another one of their games, or you might not, do whatever.
Well, if they make it too... That's the thing. It's almost a behavioural thing. Like, if you make the game too frustrating from the player... Like, imagine if you played Call of Duty or something like that, and you had 3 lives. Like, that was it. That would
start again.
Horrid.
Yeah. Well, so there are some games where it doesn't further the game. I mean, games where you're trying to tell a story. And let's face it, there's not very much story happening in Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, come on, there's princesses. There's Bowsers.
There's all sorts of stuff. All their little castles and
exactly
things that happen.
No, but narratively speaking, obviously.
Narratively speaking, you don't want to say... Yeah. So, one of my favourite stand-up comedians, Dara O'Brien from Ireland, amazing stand-up comedian. He does a very poignant routine where he talks about the fact that video games are the only form of media entertainment that will punish you for being bad at them. A book doesn't punish you for being bad at it. It doesn't close itself and say, what are the major themes that have happened so far? And if you can't answer it, if you can't answer it, you don't get to finish the rest of the book. Yeah. And a CD doesn't, assess your dancing ability before it gets to track 2. Like, you just consume these things. I would fail
so hard if that was a thing.
I would never listen to a single song. I don't think I would hear the first 10 seconds of every album, that I owned, and that would. In fact, I probably wouldn't even be able to buy the rest of the albums. They would just revoke it.
Yeah, your license has been revoked. You cannot listen to music anymore.
But the point is that with games like Call of Duty, which is, let's face it, fairly narrative heavy, even some could argue the quality of the narrative.
Yeah. But Call of Duty is one example where there's been recent kind of it's a product of the recent push towards not letting players die. So even within that genre, the FPS genre, like when you first started playing Doom, when you first started playing, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, etc., the original mechanic was that you really did only have one life on that level, and the way that you could regenerate your life is through health packs. Whereas now with Call of Duty, and obviously the first person, I honestly can't recall the history of it, but I have a fairly strong feeling that Halo was the first game to introduce
after recharging health.
Yeah, is that right?
I think it was. If it wasn't Halo, it's got to be damn close.
Pretty damn close, yeah.
Although, see, in Halo, it was the shields that recharged rather than the health.
Health.
If your shields were down, I mean, death wasn't too far away. Or certainly when I was in control of the sticks. Master Chief was not that robust.
Exactly. So they're I guess with those ones, with those games, with those first-person shooters, and we're going to continue to come back to first-person shooters because I've played a lot of them, and it's a relatively important genre in the thing, is that they are, most of the time, or most modern first-person shooters are trying to tell some kind of story, whether or not it's just a straightforward Saving Private Ryan type war story, or you have got the Halos of the world where you've got, or Borderlands where you've got quite an overarching, complicated sci-fi story going on. Yeah. They are trying to tell a story, and making it so that the player has to constantly go back to the start of that story would just be utterly awful. And so,
to have to replay sections over and over and over again. Absolutely. It gets frustrating.
Exactly. And so, to my mind, it seems like by introducing the respawning health, respawning shields, and one of my favorite webcomics of all time is the Bleeding Eyes webcomic, where when you're getting hit by bullets and the red vision comes in, actually it's your eyes like bleeding fountains of blood, and then you rest for a second and then it comes back up and you're like, good to go. But yeah, the challenge then is to play the game well. The challenge then is to be able to run into a room and headshot guys and throw a grenade and not have to stop to regen that health. So that's kind of introducing that kind of challenge. But yeah, obviously, when you're trying to tell a narrative, the number one thing that you don't want them to do is to go back to the start. It'd be like, as you say, if you look at other mediums, getting halfway through a book and having to restart it again, you just be like,
if you mispronounced a word in your head,
it's like, well, fuck that, see ya, that book is gone,
I have to read that again.
Exactly. So obviously death as a mechanic has its place in certain games, but the way that you put it in there has to be well thought out and well designed. Otherwise
it has to have meaning, is the point. I mean, it has to be there for a reason. That meaning can be mechanical, by all means. It doesn't have to be a narrative meaning, but has to be in there for a reason.
Well, there's plenty of games where there are no narrative, and therefore death as a mechanical reset button, to keep people from obtaining ludicrously high scores or whatever, makes total sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Or even if it's not death, even if it is just restarting the game, that's not a big issue. Is that 5? I think that's 5. Yep. 5 planes. It's a very busy city, Sydney.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, right. So yeah, I guess we've kind of covered the first-person shooter genre. We kind of did want to go into a couple of the genres that were important, or at least show different types of death. So we've kind of done FPS already. I guess, did you want to talk about point-and-click adventures? That'd be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, point-and-click adventures, and once you start to get away from FPS and more into the role-play side of things, death becomes a little bit different. So point-and-click, I mean, there aren't very many point-and-click adventures at all anymore.
No.
I mean, I don't know if you could maybe call The Walking Dead a type of point-and-click.
I think it is. I mean, there's exploration, there's, needing to solve puzzles, needing to get items.
And in The Walking Dead, death is present as a mechanic, both in terms of mechanical and narrative death. Although I say, I mean, I play a lot of video games, and so I'm better than, most people who don't play video games. I'm not saying I'm some sort of video master god.
Yes, but don't be modest.
But I very rarely died in The Walking Dead. I mean, even with it set to, the traditional mode without the little helping icons and boxes and whatnot, I think I probably died maybe 3 times across the entire
chapters,
5 chapters worth of content. And 2 of those were from this one scene that, the timing was just bizarrely specific and unintuitive. And when I realized what I was doing wrong, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of silly. Yeah. It was only one time when I died from indecision. And so with the Walking Dead games, you die from indecision, essentially.
And they give you
which
really
I think
annoyingly
is something
difficult
we should
decisions.
Implement in the real world. I think if people are too indecisive, they just should die.
Right.
If I'm at the coffee line at, and someone's like, well, I was thinking of maybe getting a soy flat white, but then I was like, well, do I really need the soy? Maybe I can get a half and half, or maybe, are these muffins gluten-free? I'm not really sure if I should be eating gluten. You know what? Do you have celiac disease? No, then gluten's absolutely fine. You absolute spastic. But that's a whole different rant.
Right.
So I think if the idea of having death as a mechanic for indecision is a fantastic idea, because it makes decision making important.
Exactly, and it makes you. And because the decisions that they give you in that game, and I know we're talking about specific games rather than genres in general, but it's important to talk about this one because it does a lot of things right. The decisions that it gives you in that game are really hard, and so they need
really hard.
You could sit there for freaking half an hour, like trying to come to some kind of decision that will, maintain your moral code. If you're like us, maybe if you play these games and you don't have any kind of morals or ethics, you're just like lol, click. But you could definitely sit there and take half an hour to make the decisions. They don't want you to have half an hour, and so they give you the threat of death in order to kind of speed you up. So that's a really good way of introducing mechanical death into a narrative story, or something that is highly, highly narrative, in order to enhance it. So that's a really good...
Really well used.
Exactly.
Really well used.
Really, really well used.
And in fact, it also stops people from doing that other thing, which is so prevalent these days, and it's probably worth an entire TAPTAG episode by itself, and that is the concept of Wikipedia in video games. Because Wikipedia has really changed the way that we play video games.
How do you mean?
The fact that you can, any game now, you can just, Alt-Tab and Wikipedia.
Oh, right.
And you can say, well, this is the decision I'm making. What are the outcomes of each of these decisions? Like, cool. I mean, originally that kind of
or game facts
information.
Or like that.
Yeah, game facts or whatever. I mean, the thing is, most games have their own wikis now. So, I mean, 2Wiki is not necessarily just Wikipedia itself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. Wiki is and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so once upon a time, to get that kind of information, you had to pay a lot of money for a subscription magazine service.
Or a hotline.
Or a hotline.
Oh, God.
There were actual phone numbers that you could phone up and get a tip for. How do I
They were useless. They were absolutely
They were so useless, especially here in Australia.
So bad.
If you couldn't figure out how Rambi the Rhino from Donkey Kong Country 2 is meant to headbutt his way into that particular secret level in Lockjaw's locker, whatever the situation was.
That would be really hard to describe over a phone.
It's so hard.
How would you even do that? Anyway, you got to jump at that point where you got to jump at.
So the point where the hook is at? So 4 pixels down from the hook, when your head touches that point, that's when you press X and Y simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point is that now you can just jump online and just grab the information.
It takes all the safety... it takes all the risk out of it, basically.
It's a huge safety net. So you can just go, well, this is the information I need, this is how I get past this, and this is how I do the great thing and all the rest of it. And done. I got a perfect score my first try.
Yay.
And I'm not going to say that I've never done that myself. I'm certainly guilty of it I know I did it in The Witcher. There were a couple of things where I was like, all right, I feel like this is a trap. This is definitely a trap.
I really don't want this character to die because I've gotten so attached to it.
Yeah, I don't want to screw this next part up. This is really important to me.
Yeah.
Just going to quickly jump on the Witcher Wikia. And, oh, yeah, look at that. It turns out if I do this, all these things go wrong. And but then, in other games as well, sometimes it was using that to avoid game-breaking bugs as well. So, different sides of a multifaceted coin.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point is that, so the original point was the fact that The Walking Dead doesn't let you do that. You have time, and you can't really pause the game and go and look somewhere else. You have this it's this quick thing that happens. It's almost reflexive. And, you have to live with the consequences. And I actually found that really refreshing. I found that it was really a really good use of death to make me feel like the game was important, like something real was happening, rather than me just going through the motions of telling a story.
The other game I wanted to mention was one called Gemini Rue, which is I think it was made by Wadjet Games quite a while ago. I think it was a few years ago. But it's unique in the fact that it's a point-and-click adventure game, very much in the style of older point-and-click adventures, where you're kind of going around, you've got inventory, you can...
Hugo's House of Horrors.
Yeah, exactly. You can rub the pumpkin on the rock or whatever, and you can do all those kind of things. But it also has these really bizarre bits in it where... Is that another plane? Is that 6? 6?
Just keep talking, it's fine.
Yeah. There's these really bizarre bits in it where you actually get into firefights with people. And there's like a cover system and a reloading system. And... I applaud them for trying to do something different in the point-and-click adventure genre, but it really just does not work, because if you die at that point, you're dead, and you have to start your adventure from whatever save point you would manage to get to. And it really, like, I remember the first time I played it, I got up to one of the bits where you have a shootout, and I died, and it was like, oh, great, well, god damn it, like, I have to start again from, like, random save that I did, or, you know, the auto save from, you know, a couple of...
I'll go put a pot of coffee on.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of, like I said, I applaud them for trying to do something different, and I think it's important to try these things out, but I really don't think that kind of action-based death, that kind of action-based mechanical death with no reasoning and psychology behind it, kind of hurts it rather than helps it, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess that's point and click adventure. So it's I guess the main thing to draw from that is the fact that you can have mechanical death in highly narrative stories. You just need to make sure that there's a reason for it. Like, you need to make sure that you are pushing people to make a decision when they need to make a decision, or, you know, you are using the mechanic of death in order to push the player along rather than punish them, I guess. That would be the main thing.
The carrot, not the stick.
Yeah. And the thing is that Walking Dead and Wolf Among Us and all those kind of games that are trying to do the modern point and click adventure thing also have, very obviously, narrative death. So they have characters that die because of their decisions. All the time. It's like Game of Thrones up in this bitch. You know, they have got things where you make a decision and the player dies, or you make several decisions that don't seem to make much of a difference, but hey, maybe you put a...
And then your favourite character's gone.
Yeah, and then, too bad.
You rage quit and throw your keyboard across the room.
So they are combining the two. They're combining the mechanical death and the narrative death in ways that really do affect you, and that's why those games are so highly rated and so highly...
Well, that's the thing, is you don't even need to know that these things are good things or bad things, because you see the result of these by sales and by reviews. I mean, these games are lauded. I mean, people love them, and for very good reasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, some games do manage to slip under that radar without really having very much of a story, but... Yeah. Once again, I'd love to incorporate death into Candy Crush Saga, but I again don't necessarily want the death to be within the video game. Well, that's a kind of a good segue, because I wanted to kind of talk about the fact that there is this push towards, and I hate the word so much, but casualization, I guess, the push towards casual gaming and the push towards casual experiences of the gaming, where
it's where the money is.
Well, not only where the money is, but it's where you aren't necessarily punished for failing. Like, you aren't necessarily you don't necessarily feel the stick. It's just all carrot. And hopefully it's all for the company.
Many carrots.
Hopefully it's all carrot plus your money in order to keep enjoying those carrots.
And you can buy one carrot for $50, but you can buy 3 carrots for $70.
Exactly.
And 18 carrots
for $3 million. Yeah, and so obviously nowadays there are a lot of games that are coming out where basically there is no kind of punishment for failing. The experience is that you kind of just work your way through the game. And it doesn't necessarily have to be mobile games. There are games, like I was playing one just the other day, which is called Year Walk. And basically it wants to tell a story. And again, when you're telling a story, the last thing that you want to do is make the character start from the beginning again. And so you're seeing a lot of these games that come along where it's just a matter of solving whatever challenges that they put in front of you, whether or not it's something like, you know, Professor Layton or, you know, Phoenix Wright, where you're working through a story and solving puzzles, or working through a story and solving clues and that kind of stuff. But they're not going to punish you for, you know, you didn't find this clue on page 10 of the briefing or whatever. I mean, I suppose Phoenix Wright's a bad one, because I think you can actually...
And now everyone's dead.
Well, I don't think that happens in Phoenix Wright. But yeah, I mean, there are
I haven't
a lot
played
of...
Phoenix Wright, so...
It's really fun, actually. It's one of my staple DS games, other than Elite Beat Agents, which is amazing.
Oh, God.
Oh,
so good.
I need to go back and play that game. Anyway, yeah, so obviously there are a lot of games coming out nowadays that are far less punishing to the player. So I mean, do you mind that? Do you mind that personally, or
there are some games where I love it, and there are other games where I despise it wholeheartedly. I mean, so
examples of either.
the big example for me, and this is the one that I've ranted at you over and over again for over the past 5 years, is Bioshock. I mean, Bioshock 1, this is, annoyed the absolute bejesus out of me when it first came out.
Right.
Because I played the game all the way through and didn't die once. And I really enjoyed the experience. I thought it was absolutely amazing. And then I found out that it turns out you can actually die and you just get reinvigorated in these Vita chambers that are all over the place. I mean, 2 or 3 per level.
Yeah.
And there is pretty much no consequence for dying. I mean, the damage that you've done to the enemies is still there, and you lose like a tiny portion of your health and a little bit of your, atom or your mana or whatever it is. And then you just go back out there and you do it again, and it becomes a meat grinder where you can literally just, there's these big daddy monsters, these big sort of boss creatures, and you can just, chase one and make him come, or chase you I should say, all the way to a Vita chamber. And then you just jump out and you lob some grenades at the guy, and then you die, and you jump out and you lob some grenades at the guy, and you die again, and you rinse and repeat. And then, mounted on a pile of your own corpses, you have eventually killed the boss.
But is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, think about players that aren't as godlike.
Screw those players
at games. But I mean, say if you work.
The point was, I think a big part of the game was lost in translation when you play it in that respect, and I can say that because I didn't play it like that. I thought that if you died, I didn't know about Vita chambers. I must have missed the tooltip. I thought that if you died, you had to redo things all over again.
Right.
And so it was a really big deal for me.
But that might just come down to your particular mode of play, because I know for a fact that you enjoy playing games such as, Deus Ex, and probably if you ever played a Splinter Cell game, chances are pretty good that you want to play through it without, doing things that are like, don't kill anyone or never get seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's
blah, blah,
that as
blah.
well, but it was more the fact that the theme of the game, the theme of like the setting of Rapture, and this whole, dystopian, broken down, anachronistic society, and the stealthy aspects of it, and the power of the big daddies, these gigantic suited behemoths that just knock you around with a gigantic drill hand. I mean, they were terrifying.
Yeah.
But if there is no actual punishment for dying,
yeah,
there is no reason to fear them. And if you don't fear them, they don't make sense. Well, they are fear in this game.
Okay, well, so what's the solution then? What would you prefer rather than Vita chambers?
In that game, I would have preferred if there was the autosave situation, where you have to, or maybe there was
it's not so that your damage isn't persistent.
Right, exactly. So it's not that you've just regenerated and keep going, and that sort of very casual la 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 la. But that mechanic, I'm not saying is bad, because that mechanic in Borderlands works phenomenally.
Right.
Because Borderlands doesn't have the same dark, gritty, it's not that visceral experience. Borderlands is very arcadey. It's bright colors, it's cel shaded, it's a lot of fun.
Well, again, it's that thing of the challenge for the player is not necessarily to not die, it's to do things, elegantly, as like, being able to headshot and then, duck behind the doorway and then throw a grenade out. It's being stylish is the challenge and the reward.
Absolutely. And especially when you're playing it with friends, like you're playing with people, there's also that aspect of it. Like, I've got to try and catch up to my friend as quickly as possible. You don't want one person to have to go back and redo an entire level while their friends just, sit around idly tapping their thumbs against the side of their gun. Like, it's you've got to pair the right mechanics to the right game. And I think that the Vita chambers in Bioshock detracted from it majorly, where that mechanic in other games is very, very good. It's well suited. It was just poorly chosen for Bioshock.
Right. Yeah, fair call.
So I mean, that's just it's plain, but that's one of my big gripes with the concept of making death meaningful. And in that case, there was no meaning for the death.
Right.
See, in Borderlands, the fact that you were dying and getting rebuilt from scratch at these clone stations. It regularly, the game laughs at you for this. I mean, the cloning station itself says that, you know, we've charged you for dying because we had to make your new body again, sort of thing. Yeah. And the characters are like, oh, gee, that looked like it hurt. You know, maybe next time you die, you want to, you know, do it in a different way, or like it makes fun of the fact that this is a thing that's happening.
Yeah, and as you say, Borderlands is a lot more arcadey, and so you don't feel. You kind of do feel like you want to use up your lives. Like you kind of do feel like you want to try and attack like 10 dudes at once and try and take them out.
You would still rather not die.
Yeah, but if you do, like there's not that emphasis on, you know, menace and insidiousness, and the setting is not so serious and not so, you know, wanting you to fear particular enemies.
The incentive to not die in Borderlands is that you lose your style. Is what you lose.
Yeah.
You lose that coolness, that cool factor of you going through and, you know, flipping around and
being a ninja,
meleeing one guy and then sniping another guy and switching to your auto-powered pistol that turns people on fire. Like it's about the style of it, and dying crimps your style.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that
like,
could probably,
geez, I die. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, that could probably apply to a lot of arcade games, I think. Or arcade games, I should say, not arcade games, because we're talking about arcade games already, but yeah, those games where the emphasis is not necessarily on... Well, it is on winning, but it's also on... The emphasis is also split evenly with winning with style, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So death, puts a crimp in your style. Sucks. Absolutely sucks.
It sucks. It's embarrassing. No one wants to see that.
So I just want to also talk about roguelikes, because roguelikes are, I think, really interesting, because they are as close, I think, as... Or rogues... Also, just plain rogues, not necessarily roguelikes or roguelites. They're really hard to say on video. They kind of seem like they're the alternative for people that do want this challenge of starting again from scratch. Like they're kind of the modern. You know, it's coming back with a vengeance, I think. So
yeah, there's a massive resurgence in the whole Rogue series of games.
There's heaps of damn things out, and they're fantastic. I really, really enjoy Rogues. So, I mean, for people that haven't played Rogues or don't know what the term is, a Rogue is essentially a game where you enter what is generally a procedurally generated set of content, so dungeons, landscapes, worlds, etc., with, again, generally randomly generated
challenges,
enemies, monsters, challenges, whatever, and you try and get as far as you can, and there is an end goal. Like there's usually a big bad that needs to be defeated in some way, shape or form, but you are gonna die a lot because it is randomly generated. As we say, it's randomly generated, and you kind of just need to either, I guess, the balance between your skill and what is generated. Like, obviously, if you have a higher skill, you don't really need to worry about the fact that, you might get a really bad randomly generated, set of variables. Like, your skill's going to make up for that. But if you're not as skilled, you kind of need to rely, or you kind of need to get a good run, essentially, in order to finish the game. So it kind of introduces this really interesting dynamic between the player getting more skill, or... in the case of roguelikes and roguelites, the game kind of allows you to build up abilities and, items and better stuff. So, say you start out with a wooden sword and, you get so far and you achieve something, then next time you start, you'll start off with a steel sword and, that kind of stuff. So there are games that reward you that way, but a pure rogue is basically... it's up to you, and you may put one step wrong, like 1 foot wrong, and you're screwed, basically.
Or maybe just the dice don't like you that day.
Yeah, exactly. Random number generator doesn't like you. So the thing is, I mean, the main thing, and the thing that's pertaining to our conversation, is the fact that these are games where death is an advertised feature.
Oh yeah, it's on the back of the box. You will die a million times.
Exactly, and Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 are two very... highly sought after games and highly rated games for the fact that basically they're death simulators. You are going to die so many times playing these games, and yet people are buying them in they're buying, like, they're selling out of copies and stuff like that. Steam, I think,
literally millions.
Dark Souls 2 has been at the top of the top sellers list for like weeks now, like at least a couple of weeks. So people are obviously enjoying them. So I mean, why do you think that is? It just the fact that we're getting, the average age of the gamer is getting older and older, and we're just looking for a nostalgia trip of difficulty?
that style of roguelike where it's just a meat grinder for your body, where you go through and you die and over again, the high challenge of it, it's another type of arcadey feel. I mean, it's another, because it's lots of short games. It's I don't want to say it's like almost ADHD in the sense that like it keeps your attention by being very quick, short doses of fun, very fast, very intense. And at the end, you know how it's going to end. You're going to die. Like, there's no mystery surrounding that.
You might
it's
win.
just
You might win. You might be really.
You
lucky.
might win,
but most of the time,
you know that most of the time you're not going to win, right? I mean, why do I keep coming back to FTL? Because there are, there's so many things that are hidden out there, so many permutations that you want to see, you want to uncover what could possibly happen next. It's almost like having a pass the parcel with a huge number of layers.
But it's also a skill tester, right? So it's kind of like it's kind of like the developers going, we have made a game that is insanely difficult. Come at me, bro. Basically,
Like, oh yeah.
Like
there's a certain amount of challenge to it. Like, are you good enough? Are you good enough to beat the developers at their own game? Because they know that they've made it really hard, but then they think you can't do it. I can do it, nah, sort of thing.
But it's weird though that like we are kind of seeing that split, right? So we have kind of all these games that are kind of what you would, I guess, say middling difficulty, whereby you can basically play through it. You're gonna die a couple of times playing. You're going to die a couple of times, it'll set you back a little bit, but eventually, if you play it for long enough, you're going to win. And then that's kind of like the average and kind of the most of the games that we have out there. And then you kind of have casual games where you basically can't die, and if you do die, then it's only so that they can make you pay for gems or whatever in real money. And then you've got, I should say casually marketed games. Incidentally, if you want to hear a really good conversation about casual games versus casually marketed games, listen to our podcast.
Check our previous episode.
Yeah, free advertising. Anyway, so you've kind of got that split between casual games or casually marketed games that are, very much just, you want to enjoy them, it's like watching a movie kind of thing. You kind of basically just want to enjoy the experience. Like, there's no real challenge to it. Or if there is a challenge, it's a very gentle curve that you can very happily plot along. And then you've got these ridiculously ultra hard roguelikes and rogues and games like Dark Souls where it's just like, screw you, like we don't care whether or not your fragile psyche can handle dying 1,000 times. We're gonna make you do that, and then the payoff will be that you feel like a freaking badass when you eventually beat it. So it's interesting that there's two psychological approaches to it, making it so people feel kind of safe and coddled and enjoying it, and challenging gamers to beat this ridiculously hard game and get the satisfaction that way.
Right, which comes down to the original point that we said at the very beginning, which is that it's not a bad thing.
No, absolutely
none of these mechanisms are bad. It's just choosing the right mechanism for the right game for the right reasons.
And making it meaningful to the gamers.
Making it meaningful.
Yeah. And it is a balancing act. I hats off.
It's hard. It's not easy. Yeah.
Hats off to all the developers that do it well, because and actually I guess so we've got a small list of games we've played recently of games that we think do it well.
Maybe not recently. Some of them are
pretty old. Yeah, some of them pretty old. So obviously we've mentioned a couple already. Actually, do you want to start with the bad death games? Because I feel like bad death games would be good. Or do you want to do good death?
No, we'll do good death first, because I think there's more fun to be had with the bad one.
I think that'll probably end the episode on a rant.
Yep.
Do you want to go first?
So we said we just go one by one.
Yeah, sure.
The list.
Oh, just go through it. Who cares? Go.
We said the swapper. I mean, the swapper death is a mechanic again. So again, if you want to hear more about the swapper, we did a what I thought was a pretty damn good episode on that. Where the swapper relies on you killing yourself over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And I mean, the bizarre ritual suicide of that game is entrancing and morbid and terrifying and fascinating, and it's a really, really well done game. Highly recommend it.
And the thing is, it's also the fact that it's mechanical and narrative related. So it is included in the lore of the game that you're like it questions the mechanic of death. It includes a mechanic of death, and it also questions the mechanic of death. So that's kind of it's a tricky act to pull off, and it was
ballsy of them to go there as well. Like, it was a really interestingly
that's the thing.
presented game.
They had a really good puzzle mechanic. They could have made that into a friggin' Kirby-esque fun land of fun times, but they didn't. They chose to go this very dark route of questioning what it means to use this mechanic. So, oh man, such a good game. Can't say enough about it. So I guess the next one. So you put down Kerbal Space Program, and I would say it's more of a type of game whereby you create characters and then you get attached to them as you go along. So you're talking about, Kerbal Space Program. XCOM is another one.
XCOM is a big one.
Very big one. It's an awesome game. Whereby you create these characters and then you name them and you customize them and,
tell them what to wear.
You tell them what to wear. They're part of your team. You compliment them. You tell them they're doing a good job. And then they die horribly in some kind of crash or fire or alien, weapon being used against them.
Yeah.
And your heart breaks a little bit on the inside.
Or you accidentally eject the pilot instead of turning on your landing gears.
Yeah.
Or you accidentally stage your rocket and the nozzle's pointed at the pilot's capsule, or you accidentally strand one of them on the surface of a far distant moon.
Exactly.
Or
yeah. So
forget to put solar panels on, and then they just freeze and die in the coldness of space. I mean, there are so many horrible ways to die in Kerbal Space Program.
Yeah, so these are examples of what we would say are... There's mechanical death, obviously, because if your characters die too much in, say, XCOM, you kind of run out and you can no longer...
You run out of people.
Yeah, you can kind of no longer take on the alien threat. But it's also not necessarily narrative death. It's kind of like player create. It's like the narrative isn't included in the game itself. Like, it's not.
Yeah, it's player-driven narrative.
Player-driven narrative. So you assign the stories to these people. Like, say if you've got a particularly good sniper in XCOM, like, that character, that they're going to nail like most of their shots. But then that one time that the shot doesn't land and the alien runs up to them and bats them off. No, that's a bad way of saying that. Sorry, hits them off a platform and they fall to their deaths. Like, that really does affect you and makes you angry for losing them. And if you're if you're my kind of player, then it makes you load the latest quick save that you did because you really didn't want to.
Filthy.
Yeah, because I'm a filthy cheat. But it is not necessarily included in the narrative, in the story that they're trying to tell. But you have made that story for that character, and I think that those are some of the most powerful ones. Where if the game company, if the game developer can manage to include both of those, give you enough room to make your own stories for the characters, but also kind of guide those characters along, that really is very, very powerful. And you see that a lot in books where, you're not necessarily getting all of the story of a character, so you can kind of fill in a little bit of your own details and kind of take ownership of those characters. I think that's a really, really powerful technique to use.
Incredibly powerful. I mean, like you said, you don't get it anywhere else.
No, absolutely not.
Unique to the medium.
Yeah, totally. All right.
So a big one as well for me was a really old game called Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Rogue Spear. One of the early, in fact, I think it was the second of the Rainbow Six games, which have since lost their way. Just truly terribly lost their way.
Yeah.
Because 3/4 of Rogue Spear was about planning your mission, and one tiny sliver of it was about you actually picking up a gun and going and neutralizing the terrorists. But the interesting thing about that game was that not only you played as every single character in the first person, so you could quite literally switch between the eyes of every single character in the game on any given mission. But if you died, you were dead. That was it.
Right.
And even if you were wounded, it took you several missions to recover and to get back into action again. And even then, sometimes your stats could be permanently reduced. Like, there was so much going on in that game, and it only took one bullet to kill you. I mean, it was a very, very super ultra realistic game. It was very, very big on the ultra realism.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if you got shot in the neck, that's it. if you got shot in the in the chest, you're probably dead. Maybe you might be just incapacitated. Like there was very little leeway, and so when you lose an agent, it was a big deal. Like especially if it was one of the really good ones, like Domingo Chavez or Timothy Hanley,
right.
or So I still remember these names. Almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
It was really, really well done, and it wasn't the kind of game where you could just reload, or you could, but maybe some missions were just really hard.
Yeah.
Maybe you couldn't.
Maybe at some point you just took the loss, like.
Yeah, you just had to take the loss. Well, that's that's that person gone forever. Sad face.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Another one that we put. This will probably be the last one, but this is. I mean, the reason why we put these good death games in is because they do something a little bit different. And the one that Tim put down, and I kind of questions immediately, but I still think it needs to be discussed because it does have some kind of... It does something very, very small, and it's really, really interesting, which is Half-Life. And so you may not remember, but in the original Half-Life, when you died, or I should say when you're getting injured and when you do eventually die, you have is it the HEV? Is that what it's called?
The HEV suit, yep.
Yeah, so the HEV suit had this, female voice that would tell you what your injuries are, and then if you died, it would say, heart rate low or something like that. It would basically be relating your injuries, and then you'd hear the heart rate monitor go, dee, dee, dee.
You'd flatline, essentially. You would hear your flatline.
You flatline, and... even
or
though...
it might tell you that you had broken bones or radiation poisoning,
and it would just keep going.
Why you were dying?
Yeah, and despite the fact that you could just immediately click and it would quick load whatever, auto load whatever, latest save you had, I think it's interesting that a first person shooter tried to give you that kind of just that pause, like that moment of you've just inflicted massive injuries on this person, this scientist who's just trying to do his, save his laboratory.
Well, not really his job, but...
I was going to say his job, but then it occurred to me that maybe that's not his job.
It wasn't on my job when I signed up.
As much as I would love as a scientist...
I wish it was. Yeah.
Really
I wish when I was like, I'm going to become a scientist. Why are you become a scientist? Mostly so I can beat aliens with a crowbar.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you.
Gordon Freeman, that's why I'm a scientist. Yeah, like it at least gave you... At least had an attempt to make the injuries and the death that you suffered seem more real. And I was trying to think of any other game that did that in recent times, and I really
can't think of very many.
Even just that small pause, like it was maybe a second or two max. And nowadays, like it's like quick load straight away and just jump straight back into it kind of thing. There's really no pause given for it. We may be missing stuff, and if we are, please feel free to comment anywhere.
Put it in the comments.
Yeah, because we kind of want to know whether or not there are other games that did this, because we're scratching our head over it. It was really we were really trying to figure it out, and we just couldn't. So
either way, I think it's a good example, and it's only an early example. I mean, it was a good example of something that was new at a time when they weren't doing anything like that. I mean, we weren't even experimenting with these kind of things back in the mid to late 90s.
And it's kind of making yet another attempt to make death seem more meaningful. So that's why we put that one there. So now let's have some fun. Let's talk about bad death games. So there are a few. Obviously, any game ever that has killed off a character for no reason other than shock value.
The shock value.
Yeah, there's too numerous to name. But anyone that's tried to do the very, very simple thing of, you really like, you've just met this character, but then they die. Oh no, you should
and
feel
pointing
sorry
out
for them.
as well, they're almost always female.
Almost always female. Yeah, that's true.
It's always a love interest or a daughter or a wife or a mother. It's always a female person. They get killed, then it's like, well, now you manly hero, you should go and get revenge for that weak person's death.
It's like the Rambo syndrome, basically. It's
frustrating. It's demeaning and belittling, and there are so many better ways you could have approached that.
Yeah,
not just the female thing, but just the death thing in general. I mean, you don't need to just randomly kill someone off to make me go and do something.
Yeah.
We can be a little bit more deep than that.
Absolutely.
And if you don't want to be that deep, make a different game.
Yes. God, yes.
Another big one I put down was actually the Pokemon games, as much as I love them, it frustrates the absolute crap out of me that, I mean, again, the canon of Pokemon essentially is one in which you never lose.
Yeah.
You are this, this fabled Pokemon trainer who goes through this linear story battling trainers. And in the world of Pokemon, trainers are just regular people. But it doesn't matter what you do, the regular people never get better. They always have the same Pokemon. They regularly don't have a full complement of 6.
Yeah, isn't that bizarre,
in fact,
though?
In recent games, even the gym leaders don't have a full complement of 6.
That blew my mind. I couldn't believe that the first time.
Why would you not? I mean, I never don't have 6 Pokemon. I say I literally have not caught 6 yet. If I've only caught 4, then I only have 4. But god damn it, I'll that Weedle will be in my party until something better comes along.
Exactly.
And the fact that when you do lose, you pay out some money and then you black out and then you scurry off to the nearest Poke Center and you do it again. But then you have to rebattle that same guy that you did. You just have to keep rebattling that person until you can move on to the next one. But all the people that you've battled in the meantime, you never battle them again. I mean, they never move. It's actually a very disturbing and bizarre and sad story.
Sad world.
That you have just gone through and beaten up all these young children's pets.
Yeah.
And then they never move from that spot again. They just sit there looking mournful. I mean, they haven't gone to the Poké Center to get them fixed.
No.
Are they just still dead? Like, what's the case? What's going on here? Why is this happening? This is really bizarre and creepy when you think about it for too long. And the fact that ultimately at the end, you beat the Pokemon League and then you're the new champion and then that's like, I mean, there's end game for these games, but what's the responsibility for that? Do I have to be the new champion? Am I the new league leader?
Yeah.
And where does he go? Does he replace one of the Elite Four? Does the bottom of the Elite Four get kicked off the list? Like, how does this work? There's got to be some sort of hierarchy here. Why is this never explored? This is bizarre. I don't understand.
Well, they should. I think they should do that. They should explore. I mean. The thing is that very obviously it's a kid's game. They don't want you to think too hard about these things. They just want you to get a team of badass Pokemon and smash heads.
Battle them against each other.
Yeah, smash face until you get to the top, basically. But yeah, obviously, like in any game where the punishment is so utterly not severe that you may as well just take it out. Like it's just an inconvenience.
Yeah,
that's kind of annoying. Like because it's wasted, frustrated time where you die or you faint or whatever the hell happens, and then you just have to kind of pay some token amount, some very, very token amount.
And the fact that you can't continue until you beat this one specific preschooler is very bizarre to me. I mean, why is that preschooler even still there? It's 2 a.m. What is going on? Where is his parents?
What is he out, like, turning tricks and fighting Pokemon, basically?
Yeah, I mean, he's on a dock.
Yeah,
preschoolers should never be unsupervised at a dock.
Absolutely.
Docks are scary and weird places. I used to live near one. Yeah. I didn't like going there when I was a full-grown adult.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also the fact, I mean, something like in Pokemon, I think it could really be fixed if they did 2 things. One was they got rid of the necessary battles. Like, you could just go to the next city. Maybe you couldn't do something until you've reached a certain level or, whatever the case is. There are still the gates, the level gates.
Well, so basically turning it into an open world JRPG
with or open world style thing.
Yeah,
it fits. I mean, it fits the genre.
Dude, as soon as they release a Pokemon MMO, they will be rolling in so much money.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my god.
But the second thing is, if the random people that were all around were actually random, that would actually be more interesting. First of all, it would give you reason to retrace your steps and go back down another path that you've gone on before, because there might be different people there. They might be in different locations. It takes some of the puzzle game out of it, but it would make it feel a little more sensible.
Yeah, exactly.
Just little things like that could make it just a little bit better.
Yeah. All right.
Which is what we need, right? We need Pokemon to do that a little bit better. It's not quite enough crack.
It's not quite enough crack. So also part of the bad game thing, we racked our brains for what we thought was the worst death in the history of...
In all of video games.
In the history of all video games. And we came up with, drum roll please, Deckard Cain from Diablo 3. Incidentally, spoiler alert. Maybe we'll put a spoiler alert across the video. Yeah, it's essentially Deckard Cain in the first 2 games was this revered, awesome
mentor. Like, he was your idol.
He was a cool dude. He identified things for you. Like,
you stay a while and listen.
Exactly. That's a good impression.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's this awesome guy. He's been through. He's been with some of us for over a decade.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I used to pore over his writings in the original Diablo manual of all the monsters and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because it was really well written.
Exactly. And in Diablo 3, he just very randomly and without much fanfare just dies or gets killed.
There's not even a cutscene.
No.
This is the game that is known for having the most badass, expensive CG cutscenes.
And they couldn't even spare, like, 10 seconds for Deckard Cain? Seriously.
He just, like, I think he just gets stabbed and then he keels over. Like, his little sprites, like, his heavily pixelated, low poly sprites, which, you know, let's not even go to why that's a terrible thing in that game in the first place. Yeah. But he just keels over and it's like, oh no, Deckard's dead now.
And it's like,
what?
What the hell, man? Yeah.
He's the last of the Herodrum. He just doesn't die like that. This is bullshit.
Yeah, you wanted him to have some kind of Gandalf the Grey moment where he's just, like, completely badass.
You shall not pass, goddammit.
Yeah, like,
No, he doesn't even move from his little standing spot in the town. He literally just dies.
Yeah. It's really bad. So yeah, that wins our worst deaths of all time award from TAPTAG, basically. Well done. Claps all around. Yeah, I guess that probably wraps it up. So I hope we've made some progress into the idea of what makes death meaningful and what makes death kind of a mechanic to be both continue to be used. Like, you know, there's absolutely, as we said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the game mechanic of death, but maybe just considered a little bit more and made sure to not be frustrating to the player, to make sense to the player, to be meaningful to the player, essentially.
And I went an entire episode without mentioning Star Citizen.
Wow. Except you just did. So great. Anyway.
Just putting it out there that Star Citizen death mechanic is actually really awesome.
Oh, god damn it. Go on.
Go
on. I know you want to. Go on.
So, I mean, the Star Citizen death mechanic is, again, this is talking about a game that hasn't come out yet and still won't come out for another good, couple of years. The fact that your character in Star Citizen, it is permadeath. You know, once you're dead, you're dead. Yeah. But your possessions, everything you own, when you make a character, you create a will. Your next of kin, all your possessions go to the next of kin, and your next character continues on your story.
That's kind of
cool. So it's actually, it's a really cool mechanic.
Okay.
So the other big thing they're doing is that if you do suffer, grievous bodily harm, you have the ability to be saved, if you're not fully atomized, but you come back with, cybernetic parts. Like, you might have a robot arm, or you might have a laser eye, or, whatever it is. You might have some sort of prosthetic that it may help or it may hinder depending on how, expensive the prosthetic it is that you've purchased.
That's cool.
But your character and your ships all weather and age sort of realistically as they go about their business. So someone who is battle hardened will actually be scarred up, and, he might be missing all of his limbs at this point. He might just be a torso with these other things attached on. But the point is that you can only do this so many times. Eventually your body is going to give out. And if you keep doing reckless and stupid things, you're just going to keep going through characters. And so if you're the kind of person that gets attached to the characters, it's massive incentive to not, just go out there and grind yourself stupid on some big bad boss type thing.
Yeah, cool.
So
no, that makes sense. Yeah. That's cool. All right. So I guess that just about wraps it up for today. As per usual, if you are watching this video for the first time and you want to access our back catalogue, you can access them at www.timandphill.com. That's Phil with 2 L's. You can also find us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Tim and Phill, again, with the 2 L things. If you want to find us on iTunes. You can search for us there. You can just search Tim and Phill in there, and you'll almost certainly bring us up. However, if you do want to contact us individually, you can find Tim. He is on Twitter at Dungeon Master, as you would spell it, as you would expect. He also has a website, which is corsairsanchorage.com. And if you want to find him on Steam, we're going to do something a little bit different this week because we found that people couldn't...
It's actually really hard to find you on Steam.
It's actually really hard to find me on Steam. Like, you couldn't actually search me with Apothecary and actually find me. So instead, I think you're a JSS on Steam Community, aren't you?
Yep.
So
AGEOTAS.
Yeah. So if you go to steamcommunity.com / I think it's /ID /Ageatus, that's AGETEOS. No.
AGEOTAS.
AGETEOS, right?
AGEOTAS.
Okay, what he just said. If you go to there, then you will definitely be able to find him and add him as a friend. Because searching apparently is a little bit wonky.
Doesn't work so well.
Bit
we'll try and fix that in the future. And of course, you can find Phil on Twitter. His handle is @toothsoup. Again, how you expect to spell it. Mm-hmm. You can add him on Steam. So again, steamcommunities.com /ID /apothecary, which is APO.
No, that's wrong. Sorry, I changed it just the other day. So it's now steamcommunity.com /ID /flaxer. So that's FLAXEH. Yes, that's the one. FLAXEH. That is the one.
Or you can visit his personal website, which is www.toothsoup.com.
That's the one.
Thanks for listening.
And watching.
And watching.
And happy gaming.